Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargav, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show.
It is really hard to overstate just how important the internet is to our daily lives. In fact, emphasizing on it almost comes across as unnecessary. But having said that, it is important to note that according to some estimates, only 42% in urban India and only 15% in rural India have access to internet facilities. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government, as part of its Digital India plan, has talked about bridging that divide and increasing internet access across the country. Now, one of the flagship projects under the Digital India plan has been the Bharatnet project, which aims to build infrastructure in a way that village panchayats are connected to the main internet grid of their states. This involves, among other things, laying down of internet lines in villages. Initially, 8 states had been allowed to carry forward this project. And among the first to have been awarded the tender for it was Chhattisgarh. This was back in 2017 when Chhattisgarh had been under a BJP government. The project was supposed to lay down optical fibre networks and connect 5,987 villages with internet infrastructure. In July 2018, the company that was awarded to take on this project was Tata Projects Ltd. Though an Indian Express investigation into this project has found out that even after more than 2 years, this project has not been completed. The deadline has been extended twice, and the penalties that Tata Projects Ltd was supposed to pay for missing those deadlines were waived. Gargi Verma, who reports on Chhattisgarh for the Indian Express and who conducted this investigation, joins us to discuss its findings and how this delay has affected the villages in the state. So, Gargi, at the center of your story is this project called the Bharatnet Chhattisgarh project that had been awarded to Tata Projects Limited and which we now know through your story hasn't been completed. Could you first talk about what exactly was the idea behind this project, the Bharatnet Phase 2?
The idea behind Bharatnet Phase 2 was that in a district, the Gram Panchayats should be linked to each other and to the block level, and then the blocks could be connected so that all of them could be accessed from a central network, which was to be built in the capital city itself. Now, why it was important or what was the point of all of it? At that point of time, it was just an infrastructure project which had serious ramifications in the world 2020. Nobody would have seen the COVID situation, but had we had that connectivity during COVID, a lot of our problems in the state related to health work, related to education, related to basic, for anything, any kind of work right now, villagers have to travel to the block office, whereas they could have just been in their Panchayat Bhavan and gotten the same things done. In a state like Chhattisgarh, which lacks connectivity, so to speak, in many parts, this would have been a complete game changer. However, the work which my story points out, like despite 2 extensions, the work was not even 15% complete.
And how long was Tata Project Limited supposed to take to finish this project?
This project was supposed to finish, so the tender was awarded in 2018, and the first deadline awarded to the project was in 2019. By July 2019, the project had to be finished. However, the project ran afoul in the first year itself. In 2018, 3 show cause notices were sent to the company for not being able to meet the milestones as per the tender document. And after that, there were issued a penalty. So on 3rd November 2018, the first penalty was issued on them, which amounted to 164 crores. After that also, they were given a lot of times to fasten up the work. There were a lot of problems going on at that point of time. The governments were changing. In 2019, 23rd February 2019, the second penalty was issued on them. The second penalty was capped at 200.95 crores, simply because that was the maximum penalty under this project as per the tender documents. And Of course, this decision was taken to SLIC, the State Level Implementation Committee. The State Level Implementation Committee met multiple times. We have minutes of meetings that they spoke about the extension of timeline, the way the work was lagging behind. And finally, the fifth SLIC meeting, they gave the extension so that the work could be finished by 2020, by July 2020. This had happened in October 2019, the SLIC meeting. But at that point of time, nobody knew that COVID was going to happen. So everybody thought that July 2020 was a good enough, extension. So after that, in 2020, Tata has cited COVID as a reason for not working, despite the central government's clear orders that Bharatnet work needs to continue. They have cited COVID and they have cited multiple reasons for delay. And although the on paper, timeline for them, which was extended in July, is till December, sources believe that till March 2021, there wouldn't be completion.
Okay, so you have a scenario where Tata has missed two deadlines already. And I suppose when such big projects are involved, you would normally have deadlines and penalties when you miss those deadlines. But what did Tata do after the first 12 months, after it missed its first deadline?
So instead of focusing and getting, experienced workers in the fore, actually went against the penalty. They fought tooth and nail on the penalty, saying different request letters were sent to sort of fight the penalty because they believed that the work was not being done for whatever reasons. We do not have their official version, but they said that they were working at the best of their ability. So even in the first phase, when the first year had not gone by, when they were receiving the several show cause notices, from the information that the sources have given us, there was a lot of disquiet about the companies that Tata was subcontracting its work to. These were small companies, local companies. Of course, local companies had to be, subcontracted for the sheer size of the project. But you would expect the companies to be more polished, so to speak, in the work that they provide. But that somehow did not happen. They hired a firm called GSPL in 2019, right before the penalties to be, the decision on the penalty was taken on the fourth SLIC meeting, in which there was no decision, but they had hoped to get an overturn. However, that had not happened in the fourth SLIC meeting. So after the fourth SLIC meeting and before the fifth SLIC meeting, Tata hires a GSPL as a subcontractor. And GSPL stands for Galaxy Synergy Private Limited. Their office is in Raipur. And according to the spokesperson, it's a sister concern of DV Industries. DV Private Limited, which is another firm in Raipur.
And what kind of company is GSPL?
GSPL is a telecom company. It works in laying down of cables and connectivity. But according to Dheeraj Dubey, one of the directors of GSPL, the company was working mostly as a labor contractor for Tata. They would get raw materials from Tata and they would provide their services of, digging trenches, laying down cables, things like that. One of the clauses in their work order states that they are experts in delay analysis and assessment, which when I asked the company to explain as to what their work entailed, they could not. So we do not know what kind of delay analysis and assessment they were doing. According to that same work order, another clause also says that it was the job of the contractor, in this case GSPL, to get extension of timeline and without any penalty. Which raised a lot of eyebrows, even in the bureaucratic circles, because that just is not the job of the contractor. The contractor's job is just to meet your deadlines and finish your work, the amount of work that you prescribe there. How could a contractor, a third party, ensure that the CHIPS, which is the nodal agency handling Bharatnet Phase 2, not levy any penalty or give a waiver to GSPL? which was like a red signal, red flag, sort of. Tata explained it by saying that this was basically intended to ensure that there is no penalty levied because of GSPL's work. However, the language in the clause which says contractor shall actively assist and ensure that extension of timeline is granted without any penalty or late deduction. The actively assist part I get, but this ensure, that's a part of the work order that is issued to a company, which entails all the things, like it's sort of a checkbox where all the things, if you do, you get paid. So this was definitely a red flag. This was something that we found. Sources inside chips believe that there could be many more like this. So even though they could have gotten experienced players, Tata claims that even GSPL is an experienced player because of its sister concern DV. But DV is an infrastructure firm. It had nothing to do with telecommunications, so to speak. So why were then they granted the project, despite being late by a year?
And also, what understanding did GSPL have of the penalty when they got this contract from Tata? Did they know about it?
GSPL was aware of the penalty. GSPL was aware that there was a delay with Tata. But like you just said in the beginning, these kind of delays are a part, like in the first year, there are many companies that delay their project. They delay the project timeline, or they could not meet their milestone. First year is always a bit more confusing.
Okay, so we now understand that Tata Projects Limited missed its deadline twice. There was an eventual waiver of the penalty against it. And in the middle, they also got a company, that we understand was not fully capable of taking on a project like this.
Or I would say, instead of demanding or, commenting on their capability of work, I would just say that demands that were levied on them were not appropriate. You cannot bring in a company expecting them to ensure that you get extension of timeline. Although you did get the extension of timeline, but it's still invalid.
Right. And now we have a situation where, like you mentioned, only 15% of the project has been completed. So considering all this, what kind of questions does it raise, and what about it makes it seem out of the ordinary?
Why is it out of ordinary? Is simply because Tata comes with a brand name. And secondly, this was, even by Tata officials, this was not a very long, arduous, painful task, because you are not providing water or you're not building great buildings or dams. What you're doing is you are digging trenches, you are laying your optical fiber in it, and you are connecting it to routers you already have in different locations. So it should, even by their standards, when I asked them how long it took to form one unit of connections, I was told that it could be done within a week or two. So if we talk about that and then we look at the whole picture, the twice delay is just, I don't understand why why the extensions of timeline had to happen. There were rumors and there were suggestions that there were delays with government permits and all of that. And that's a separate story altogether. But like the tender document says, whoever bids for a tender needs to have the socio-political and the geographical understanding of that region. When you sign for a project, you are aware and you sign saying that you are aware of the challenges that you would meet, in the project. And then you decide the deadline. And it has not happened once, it has happened twice now that the deadline has, you said that you would be able to finish work till a point, and you have not been able to. And believe you me, there would be a third extension if things went the way they are, which would mean that till March 2021, we would not know what's the status of Bharatnet in Chhattisgarh.
We'll be talking to Gargi more about how the project being delayed has affected villages in Chhattisgarh after this short break. Dear listeners, before we move on to the rest of the show, I just wanted your quick attention. One of the big reasons people say they like this show is because it helps them understand the news better. It provides them with the context they need to see the bigger picture.
And there is perhaps no other place that does that better than Indian Express's Explained section. We on Three Things refer to the section regularly, and it helps us make this show. If you're a regular reader of Indian Express, you know how useful the Explained section can be, especially when you're looking for in-depth analysis by the right experts. You can log on to indianexpress.com/explained and access the coverage 24/7. Explained by Indian Express, where news that matters is explained by experts who know the subject. Now, back to the show.
So, over the years, we have come to understand the internet as this fundamental right. And you also mentioned in the beginning, especially now when everybody's supposed to be social distancing and not venture out too much, there is a lot more reliance on the internet. So in that sense, how has this delay in laying out internet lines affected the villages in question?
So, for city dwellers, COVID has been about isolation and getting inside their homes. This has not been the case for villages. For villages, things happened because officials visited those villages, teachers came to those villages, government functions used to go on the way they were. Right? Right now, the entire government machinery is focused on finding out cases. It's not that they're ignoring their duties, but several things like schools are shut, completely shut. During the severe lockdown, when even the government offices were shut, there was nothing one could do. If there was a death in the house, getting a death certificate was, you had to go to the block office or even the district office. And that's difficult at a lockdown situation. So we can first talk about how the schools have been impacted, because that's a story that we have covered as Indian Express. There's a dearth, there's an entire batch of children that may never go back to school just because schools are shut and their parents have found employment for them. And they don't know when the schools will reopen and at what state they would be financially if they could go to the schools. There are villages in Chhattisgarh where online classes are just not happening because there is no net connectivity, there is no internet, they don't have sophisticated phones even if there is a connectivity. So at that point of time, having Bharatnet, even if it did not have internet, okay, even if there was an infrastructure in place, the state could have used that infrastructure in establishing connectivities. One of the part of Bharatnet Phase 2 was that they would provide hotspots from their village Gram Panchayat. Imagine children gathering outside the Gram Panchayat in batches of 10 or 15 every hour, just accessing that hotspot and attending the classes that they need to. That itself would make such a difference. The health sector, when COVID had just begun, the health department had held camps for, training their staff as to how to deal with COVID. Everybody from the villages had to be called to the district headquarters where they had to sit and they had to attend a one-day camp. If the villages were connected, even to their blocks, it would have become much more easier to impart that training. It would have been much more easier to collect data, to get data of migrant workers immediately. How many have left from the district headquarters? How many have reached in the villages? It would have been a complete game changer, so to speak. We would not have so many of the issues that we are having right now if we had that connectivity. And of course, nobody knew about this back then. But somehow being able to have that in 2017. In 2017, the tender was, floated. So 3 years for a project like this just does not make sense.
Were there any moments while reporting the story that came as a surprise to you, or having covered these things for some time now, you're like, okay, this kind of stuff doesn't really surprise me anymore?
There were moments which were like, okay, this doesn't come as a surprise because, of course, things have been a certain way for years inside the red tapeism, so to speak. But of course, there were definitely moments like when the penalty was waived off. So from being a penalty that was deducted every month, it became a proposed penalty just in like one swoop of signature, which happened in 27 January 2020. And since then, the penalty that was imposed became a proposed penalty, which was waived off in August 2020. And it was definitely a shock to me. It was definitely raised eyebrows, of course, because that's not how system functions. And when I went to the villages across the state, the Arang villages that we've spoken about in the third story, the villages over there did not even know what they were missing out on because, of course, digital literacy is very less. But when we explained to them as to what were the benefits that were offered or what could have happened, they were, of course, bamboozled that why were we not allowed to do this or why were we not allowed to have this facility, which was really difficult for me to process because at the time of COVID, we have all been on the ground and we have all seen the realities of how bad it was for migrant workers, for children, and how bad it is being for children for so long.
Okay, and in this sense, considering it involves Tata, which is one of the biggest companies in India, how important is it to hold companies like these accountable so that they pay penalties and understand that they need to get their job done?
I definitely believe it's very accountable, not just for Tata, but also for the governments. Of course, being private entities, it's very difficult to regulate how a company reacts to government decisions, right? But the government should at least have the interest of people in their minds and not the interests of, say, a particular corporate. The times that we are living in, it's very difficult to have that kind of accountability towards corporates individually or like for an organization. But the government can definitely do that. And two IAS officers did that before the third one. The accountability needs to be even more because Tata is, like you said, one of the biggest brand names in the country. And when you think of Tata, you do not really think of not delivering on their work. So that definitely is a question that needs to be looked into as to how can the accountability be made better. But there is definitely a need of accountability simply because, like in this story, in the 3-part series that we did, the department has sort of shut their eyes to the reality and gone like, acha, theek hai. If towards the corporate, like their allegiance has been towards the corporate, which is really dangerous. And as far as the penalty, is the penalty is a very small aspect of it. The penalty is the aspect of it that we can see. For Tata to pay is not important. What is important is that Tata finishes the work, which has been delayed for so long and which still does not resonate on the ground. Like there are some of the villages that are lit, but there are so many that have not even been connected yet. So many where, the work has not even started.
You were listening to Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargav, and as always was edited and mixed by our producer Joshua Thomas. Before we go, here's another reminder to check out Indian Express's Explain section. You can log on to indianexpress.com/explain and find in-depth analysis by the right experts. It has everything you need to know to understand the news better and see the bigger picture. If you like this show, then you can subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.